Hey, 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 party people. It's Brandi and Cesley, and we're back with Blooming Through Faith, the podcast that helps you grow and bloom in your mindset, lifestyle, health, and wealth. We want you to know that you are capable, beautiful, and worthy. Today, we're going to explore the power of resilience and finding hope in the midst of life's toughest seasons. So whether you're facing personal challenges, you're navigating uncertainty, or simply seeking a beacon of light, join us as we uncover strategies, stories, and insights to help inspire you on your own journey towards a brighter tomorrow. Okay, so we are going to talk about how to have hope in tough seasons. First, let's talk about what are we struggling with that makes us give up hope or question having hope. The first thing we're going to talk about is that negative filter. Okay. So we generally view things from a negative filter first. And like, that's my husband. Like, it's like that cup half empty versus half full, right? We automatically, or we just assume something happens and we're like, oh my gosh, this always happens to me. It's the worst. Or somebody says something and you're like, oh my gosh, why are they directing that towards me? Blah, blah. And you just like, you automatically assume, which definitely isn't always the case. Assumption is evil. Assuming, I don't know, I've just made that up, but assumption is evil. It's assuming.
It is.
It is like most of the time it's not true, and it's like our mind playing tricks on us, right? But if you start the other way and you're like, wait a second, they maybe didn't mean to address me that way. You know what? This probably happens to other people. How can I be solutions oriented? You know what? This isn't awesome, but let's look at it in a positive light. Let's look at it with the glass half full versus empty, right? What happens when people compliment you? And I am so bad at this. I am so bad at this. When somebody's like, "Oh my gosh, you look so great." I'm like, awkward. What do I do with my hands? Or you did. Yeah, seriously. I'm like, how do I say thank you? You know, and then I always say, thank you. You look great. It's always like, I can never just take a compliment. It's like, oh my gosh, you look great. Your eyes are great. Or if somebody's like, you accomplished this, I was like, I couldn't do it without this person, this person, this person, right? Instead of just accepting the compliment.
Yeah. I think it's really important because I think this is a big one for a lot of women. A lot of women view things through a negative filter, and we really have to. So for me, I have to be able to submit that to God and say, okay, God, like this is something that I obviously struggle with. So I need you to work on this. And it's okay if we don't get it every time. Like it's good. It takes practice. So it's something that you have to submit and say, okay, God, I need you to work on this. And then constantly be practicing overshadowing the negativity with positive self-talk. Just like Brandi said, changing the perspective, because like, just like you said with the example of compliments, like so often when we get complimented, we're like, oh yeah, but this, like, oh, your hair's so pretty. Oh yeah, but I had this and I do this and I can't, like, it's because we're so used to viewing ourselves with a negative filter that we cannot fathom that other people see us so positively. So you have to practice overshadowing that negative with positive self-talk. All right. The next thing that we do that makes us struggle with hope is catastrophize. Now, y'all, I am all for a therapy-based session of catastrophizing with a professional, not on your own. Okay. I love therapy. We love therapy here at Blooming Through Faith. And I have, with therapists, gone through like kind of some healthy unpacking of traumas where we did a little bit of that because she was able to help talk me around to the solution. Right. But when we're on our own, something happens in our day and we will blow it up. We'll catastrophize it because past things have happened to us, right? So like for me, I'm going to be very vulnerable right now and say like my husband and I over the last couple of years have been kind of struggling and going through this fertility journey. And that's not something that very few people know. And it's something that I still have a lot of hope for because of a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in this episode. But you know, it's really easy. And for anybody that's going through a fertility journey, for anyone who's kind of tracking, you know, ovulation and going through that step, you know what I'm talking about when I say you get to a certain time of the month and you immediately go, oh man, like I'm not pregnant. Oh, that didn't happen. And so the next month, guess what? It's a lot harder to stay hopeful and go, okay, maybe this is the month, because guess what happened last month? it didn't happen, right? So we struggle to have hope because of the things that have happened to us in the past. It's not because of our current situation. Like every day is a new day. Every month, every week, every step you take is a new step. But we're constantly basing our current situation off of everything we've been through in the past. And I'm somebody that does it too. I'll constantly go like, "Oh, well, I don't want to get my hopes up because, obviously it didn't work last time." And we shouldn't do that. We catch ourselves just thinking about what's the worst that could happen.
That's so good. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was going to cry, but I was really close to crying. So thank you for sharing with us because
Sorry.
you really are. I love you and I have hope for you and Tommy too. And can't wait till it happens. But a lot of people struggle with fertility and nobody really talks about it. And it's really, really difficult. I want to tell you this story because hopefully it gives you hope and maybe some listeners hope. But I ask women a lot because of the things I've gone through. But I was having a facial last year and the girl, she had a son the same age as mine. And we were just talking about that. She goes, yeah, Noah's my little miracle baby. And we love him so much. And I said, oh, you're a miracle baby. Like, tell me a little more about your story. And she said, we went through 9 rounds of IVF.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
every day, because she couldn't do it herself, every day her husband drove an hour from where they live to where she works to give her that shot. And I'm
Oh,
literally getting a facial. I'm crying. I'm like, you have the best husband in the world. Like, no way my husband would
my
do that.
husband
He'd be
can't
like,
do
listen,
needles. He would not.
actually, I had to take a shot this whole past pregnancy. And Mitch was like, you have to do it on your own. I said, what?
My injections, Tommy just looks the other way. He's like, oh, are you going to do that now? I'm like, yes. What are you doing? And he's like, oh, okay.
It's so hard, but they
But she
got
has her
their
miracle
miracle baby.
Yeah.
And just for anybody going through it, know that you're not alone and we're thinking of you. And it is hard. It is hard because I can't imagine because I've never gone through that journey. So I cannot imagine how hard it must be. So thank you for sharing,
Yeah.
Cecily.
But everybody goes through their own journey, like with everything that y'all went through too. Like we go through these seasons where we really do lose hope. And it's not necessarily, if we're just looking at our situation as an isolated, like if I'm just taking it month by month and I'm looking at that month, nothing bad has happened. It's a great month, but it's very easy to go, oh, but this happened in the past, and that can be really scary when we sit there and kind of live in it. So we get it.
100%. And then the next one on this topic is comparison, right? So what are your eyes focused on? What are you looking at? Are you comparing your journey? Like we just said, Cecily said, we all have different struggles. We all have different journeys. Are you comparing your journey to others' journeys? Are you comparing, and we say that a lot on this podcast, are you comparing your chapter 1 to somebody's chapter 20? And I was actually listening to Trent Shelton, one of his podcasts, and he kind of mentioned it too. Trent Shelton is one of the most successful men ever. Okay. Let's just talk about how great he was at football. Well, that didn't work out. Now he has a top podcast. He has a #1 selling book. And he mentions that sometimes he gets on social media and he gets in these pages with other people that he works with and, locks arms with, and he starts questioning his worth. He starts questioning himself. He's like, well, why am I not doing that? And he's got to stop. So it doesn't matter what level you are in life. Sometimes we are so hard on ourselves and we're comparing our journey to somebody else's. And always remember, everybody's, success is going to be different. Everybody's journey is different. Just because somebody wrote a book doesn't mean that you need to. Just because somebody has a podcast doesn't mean you need to. So what is your vision? What is your purpose? You're not failing, babe. You're doing great. But in your mind, if you're comparing yourself to somebody else who's on a different journey, it might make you feel as if you are. And we talk about this a lot too. Get rid of people's highlight reels. Oh my gosh, because most of it is not true. It is like they're literally going into debt, going on vacation. They are pretending, something that's not. We've talked about clean houses. So don't scroll social media and think that this woman or this person has a better life than you and you are feeling because your house is messy. That is not the truth. That is the devil. Stop comparing yourself to highlight reels. Last thing, and then I'm going to pass it back over to Cecily. I saw this, and this is Mel Robbins, she has a great podcast too, a great TED Talk, but she said, at the end of life, and I might be saying it incorrectly because it's just off the top of my head right now, but it's like you realize that you maybe have scrolled social media for 20 years. Think about that for a second. You're sitting there scrolling
Wow.
social media, and at the end of
Yeah.
your life, you wasted 20 years. Would you say, yes,
Watching other
I
people's
wish
life.
that I had the opportunity, right, to go back and waste
Yeah.
those 20 years again? Or would you change things? Because I know I would change things, and I work
Yeah.
from my phone. And after reading that, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, powerful. Let's make some changes.
Put the phone down.
Mhm.
I think it's like looking at someone's wedding day and thinking that's their relationship. It's like looking at the most beautiful day that someone goes through and you're like, oh, they have a perfect relationship. Well, no, babe, that's the best day of their lives. Like that doesn't happen, you know? Or looking at someone's pregnancy announcement and being like, oh, that must have been so easy for them, not knowing they've gone through 9 rounds of IVF. You know what I mean? Like it's just, you never know what journey someone has taken to get where they're at, in comparison. Just like you said, the enemy loves comparison.
So I like to actually speak on that one because that was me. So when I had our first loss, and those that have gone through miscarriages that are listening to us, I was so angry. I was so bitter. I was not happy for my friends and family and anybody on Facebook that was having baby announcements. I wasn't. And I'll be honest, it was hard for me. And then after I lost faith, my mindset changed, and here's why. Because what Cecily just said, I didn't announce my first pregnancy because it was in the first trimester, right? So nobody knew that. But my second one I had already announced. So we lost her at 16 weeks. When I announced that, so many people were like, I've gone through that too, X, Y, and Z. So sorry, blah, blah. And some of those people had 5 children, but they had lost 4 children. So in my mind, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they're having another baby again. It's so easy.
They're
Just
getting
like
everything
said,
they want.
they're getting everything they want, but they also went through 4 losses. So you can never judge a book by its cover.
Yeah. Yeah. Or question, like, I also think, like, who are we to question God's timing and beautiful miracles in our life? Like, I don't think for a second, and don't misread me here, I never think that God wants terrible things to happen to us. And that's a whole, like, people have these controversial topics on, like, why would God allow this? Why would God allow that? And that's not what I want to get into. But I think that he can take pain and use it for something very good. And I think that through the tragedy and the loss and the devastation that some people go through, they are able to come out on the other side and help so many. And so I don't think that God ever wants that to happen, but I do think that we have a choice. Just like when Susie was on our podcast and she said some stuff that was so powerful, and she said, I have a choice to be a survivor through what happens to me and just survive, or I have a choice to thrive in my life after what happens to me. And I think that we're so quick to compare our tragedy with other people's successes when we haven't seen their tragedy. We have no idea, you know? And they could have just made the choice following tragedy to turn their life into something beautiful despite the devastating things. So let's break down the word hope. And I know this is going to be it's going to feel silly, but you're going to see where I'm going with this. Okay. So when we say, like, oh, I hope, what do we think of when we think that word? Because we're talking about how to have hope during a tough season or coming out of a devastating season. And if we're breaking down the word hope, we usually think of it as, like, if I say, I hope that this happens, I'm kind of saying I'm not sure if it will work out, right? Or I have doubt. So hope is defined in 2 ways. There's 2 different definitions of hope. The first is a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. So that's kind of the definition I just talked about, right? Like, I desire. I'll use since I've already opened the pot, I'll use myself as an example, right? I desire another child. I desire to have a baby, right? And if I say, oh, I hope that happens, then I'm saying, it might not. The second definition of hope in the dictionary is a feeling of trust. And I thought it was so interesting when I was kind of doing some research on this episode that those 2 definitions to me feel so different. Like they couldn't be further from each other. We don't want to live by the first definition of hope. We don't want to live by the expectation or desire for things to happen. We want to live by the feeling of trust. Like, we have to live with the idea that we trust that even when we go through trials in life, that God will use those trials for good. And we can decide whether we want to be a survivor of life or a thriver of life, because life is going to happen. Life is going to happen. Change is going to happen. Devastating things are going to happen. Like, it's crazy to think that we can stop that. It's just life. Like, we see it every day. There's no stopping it. But how are we able to pick ourselves up after a season of grief or devastation? It's by trust in the future.
I love that. And it's all about picking yourself back up, because here's the deal. You're allowed to be down. You're allowed to be sad. You're allowed to feel those things, right? And I wanted to say something else is like, hey, you don't know what somebody's going through. And there might be some people, because there are, that they have had non-challenging lives. They have had an easier road or route than you. And that's okay. Good for them. Because do you actually want other people to go through the pain that you've gone through? No. Like, honestly, because we say that, oh, they have had such an easy ride. We don't want them to have to go through anything that we've gone through, right? So think about that for a second when we're like, oh, they've just had such an easy life. Good for them, you know?
Yeah. It's okay to be misunderstood too there. Like, it's okay for people to not understand where you are coming from because they've never walked through what you've walked through. Like, that's okay. We don't have to, have a hardened heart for friends of ours who might not understand what we're going through because they have had it easy. I think a lot of times it's easy for us to like harden ourselves to those people because they're like, they don't understand what it's like to go through trauma. Well, that's great.
Right.
Like, God bless.
Right. And maybe sometimes we have to give them grace because they haven't and they don't understand. They also don't know how to communicate when we do talk about it. So we have to know that that's not coming from a bad place from them. It's just that they don't know how to communicate that. So like, you can feel bad, you can have those things, but we're talking about how do you get out of it, right? How do we not stay there? Because we talk about this a lot. You're given this one life. Do you want to live this one life with your cup half full? You want to live this one life wishing and hoping, but never taking the opportunity to, being negative and depressed and not having hope? Because for me, I'd rather live in faith. I'd rather live in hope, right? And so what we're going to talk about is how to have hope, how to find hope. And the first thing we're talking about, I'm not gonna get too far into it because we talk about this all the time.
All the time.
It's like the number one thing we talk about, but it is practice gratitude. Okay. Reflect on the things that are going right and that you do have that you're thankful for. Think about that, right? So like, there's so many things that we can be upset about, but there's also so many things that we should be, thankful for. First thing is, hey, do you have a home? Do you have a bed to sleep in? Do you have running water? Do you have food? Let's think about, we take all of that for granted because there's some people who don't. So you can just start with those things. Are you safe? Do you have a job, right? What are the things that you do have that you're thankful for? So gratitude will help you find hope.
Yeah. That the one that you just said that really resonated is, are you safe? Like, I think we take that for granted a lot. Like, do you feel safe? And if you have that, if you feel loved and you feel safe, like, hey, it's a good day. Like, it might be a bad month. You might have had a lot of things knock you down in the last month, but it is a good day. And if we can start with a good day, then we're going somewhere. Right. So number 2 in how to have hope, how to find hope in these tough seasons is seek support through friends, family, coworkers, therapists. Y'all, I know so many people who are like, I'm not going to therapy. And I'm like, okay, I totally respect that. However, if you are feeling like you're drowning and that you don't have hope and you don't have friends, you haven't gotten to the place where you trust a community yet or friends yet or family yet with whatever it is you're going through, maybe it's something private. Like maybe, at the beginning of our fertility journey, we weren't sharing with the whole world what we were going through. You know what I mean? And so if I didn't have someone, an avenue to talk to about that, that would have been so crushing. And I would have felt so much more hopeless because I'm like, well, I have nowhere to take this to. If you're not ready to share with friends and family, I really, really recommend thinking about talking to a therapist, a counselor. It doesn't mean there's something broken or wrong with you. It just means you want someone to talk to. And this is a really great analogy that I actually just heard today. And so I added it in my notes because I was like, oh my gosh. But I forgot what podcast it was on, but somebody was talking about, it was a fitness-based podcast and they were talking about marathons. I know it's weird. I listen to, workout podcasts, but And it had to do with like having endurance and stuff and little tips and tricks. And they were talking about marathons, and they were talking about Olympic runners, and some of the best runners in the world do not run by themselves. They have pacers. And I never thought about this because Brandi knows I'm not a runner. I do not enjoy running. I do not it's not something that like makes me feel good. I walk with my little dog, Princess Buttercup, and I walk with my children, and I lift weights, and I do other cardio. I'm not a runner. But I learned that the fastest people in the world, they hire and pay pace setters. So these are people that, not that people that run the entire marathon with them, but these are people who maybe will run one leg of the race with them. Okay. Because they can run as fast as these people, but not for as long as these people, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's not their race. They have not been training for years for this race. So, y'all, we need pace setters in our lives. Think about this. Who are your pace setters? A lot of times we don't want to share our kind of hopeless thoughts with our community, but you have to find community and safe people who you can share these thoughts with. You have to. I don't think people realize how important community is for our support, and you're never going to live in real community, and you're never going to have freedom in that unless you share with them what's going on in your life. Otherwise, you just have acquaintances, right? You have to have community, people that will affirm the truth about you when you're having hopeless thoughts. So when you feel a certain way about yourself or your life or your situation, these are people that know you well enough to say, hey, that's not true. Like, people that will affirm the truth about you in a loving and accountable way. If someone were to call me and say, hey, I'm really feeling this, I should be able to say, hey, like, I have walked through that. I'm your pace setter. I've walked through this with you. I understand what this feels like. I've gone through something like this. I can't fix this for you, but I can come have a cup of coffee with you, or I can come sit with you, or I can come help you. True community means not being a fix it myself type of person, but really having those pace setters.
I love the pace setter analogy. All right, so number 3, and we've talked about this in the past too, but engage in self-care. And what do we mean by that? So sometimes when we're feeling hopeless, we're feeling overwhelmed, we're feeling burnt out, we're go, we're on that hamster wheel because you know what? Life is hard and we have to work and we have to, provide for our kids and take care of our kids and all of those things. And so it gets time where you'll feel hopeless or depressed, and it's simply you are feeling overwhelmed and burnt out. So taking care of yourself, and I don't mean just like getting a pedicure here and there, right? But engaging in self-care, like exercising regularly, meditation. What hobbies do you have? So maybe you don't love and enjoy your 9 to 5, but like I just said, you have to work to provide for your family. Maybe you do your hobbies on the weekend. Maybe you like knitting. Maybe you like crafting. Maybe you like creating tumblers. Like, what fills you with joy? Spend time in nature. Go outside. Walk. Listen to the birds chirp. Look at the sun. Like those different things, right? Reading. If you love reading, I'm more of a podcast audible person, but so many people get lost in books, and that fills their cup, right? That would be considered taking care of yourself and engaging in self-care. Or maybe you're passionate about painting, right? Those are just some actions. So it's at the end of the day, when we're feeling overwhelmed, let's take a step back and pour into our cup so that we realize life is worth living, that there is going to be a brighter day.
Yeah, I love that. And I love even what you said about kind of getting lost, not just in reading, but in anything, being able to get lost in something. It doesn't just take your mind off of it, but it also can just kind of help give your brain a break, because when we're feeling hopeless or burnt out, like, our mind is running. We're running through all the scenarios of just the bad. And so sometimes like these self-care activities can be just a mental break. Like it doesn't have to be like, oh, I really need to do things I enjoy. It can just be so much as like, my brain needs a rest. And for this time, I'm going to just pause and rest. And kind of on that same note, the next one that we want to talk about is focusing on solutions. So I know that when you're feeling hopeless, or when you're in a season of grieving, devastation, just a tough season, anything like that, it can be really hard to be like, well, how am I going to fix this? Like, and I'm not talking about an immediate solution, but strongly recommend that you take some time and write down and visualize, what do I want this to look like? Like, I know where I'm at right now with this. What do I want this to look like? Whether it's, what do I want my mindset about it to look like? What do I want the situation to look like? Like, if I'm in a situation where it's not great and I'm going through a tough season, where would I where do I want to be mentally, physically in my situation? Write it down. Think about it. Take time to write down the steps of like, hey, these are some things that can make this situation better. Even putting pen to paper and writing that down will help your brain feel less hopeless. You will give you some hope because you have an idea on how to get out of that situation and circumstance.
I love that. And
Yep.
let's use an example of like, maybe you don't love your day to day. Take the time, like Cecily said, what would be your ideal day? Right.
Mhm.
And I did this when I was transitioning, like out of my nonstop. It wasn't a 9 to 5. It was a 60 to 80 hour work week. But what does your perfect day look like? Write that down
Mhm.
and start living that in some aspects,
Yeah.
right? Does that mean you don't rush to a Zoom call at 9 a.m.? You actually get to drop your kids off and do a workout, right? So reschedule, start trying to
Yeah.
live that life that you want. Another thing is, I know a lot of people get depressed and feel hopeless when they have a lot of struggles when it comes to finances and debt. That is like the
Mhm.
biggest reason people get divorced. It's the most stress. And right now with the economy and inflation, you might be feeling that way. I totally
Yeah.
understand. So being solutions oriented, looking at your bills, how can I spend less? What can I do
Yeah.
to make more? What does that look like? Does that mean, maybe looking at a side hustle? Does it mean, getting rid of your YouTube TV, which I actually don't tell Mitch I'm getting rid of our YouTube TV because like we don't use it and it's $80 a month. I can't do it anymore. It is happening. I'm
I
getting
got rid of
rid of it.
Netflix because we watch everything on everything else we have. And I was like, we don't even use this. The kids
Exactly.
asked for the first time they tried to get on something on Netflix for the first time in like 6 months. And I was like, you're just now noticing we don't have that. I feel affirmed in my decision.
Exactly. So be solutions
Mhm.
oriented and figure out how you can find a way out because there always is.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one. Find meaning and purpose. Okay. So like you guys might be listening to Cecily and I and you're like, oh my gosh, you guys, you have meaning, you have purpose, like in so many different aspects of your life. I don't know what that looks like for me. Right. I heard this on a podcast too, and it really resonated. Right. So if you had all the money in the world, what is the one thing you would fix? Okay. Meaning you don't have to work. What would you do? Would you give back to a charity? Would you work at a church? Would you, what is the one thing in the world you would fix? What is
Yeah.
the one thing in the world you want to do? And think about that. And that is going to be aligned with your mission and your purpose. Is it like my sister-in-law? She's obsessed with animals. She's a nurse. She actually hates her job as a nurse. If she had all the money in the world, she would have a vet, like a rescue. She would
Yeah.
that she talks about it. That would be her mission. That would be her purpose, right? So think about that
I
and
love that.
finding that and what sets your soul on fire.
Yeah. Because a lot of times we feel hopeless and we don't even realize it's because we haven't stopped to take a look at, well, what would I rather be doing? Like, what is it that's going to make me feel better? And it's kind of like Brandi said, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be, I'm feeling hopeless, so I'm going to quit my job tomorrow. Don't do that.
No,
But
please no.
what does your ideal day look like? And you know what? I promise you're going to feel better if you take bits and pieces of that and incorporate it into your life. 100%. Yeah, I love that. And kind of on that same thought of finding out what sets your soul on fire, finding out where your place of greatest hope is going to be. And the last one that we want to bring up is setting down the expectation of your timing. And I'm going to explain a little bit about what I mean by that. But I want you to think about this. Whatever it is that you want in this world. So like whatever your goal is, whatever is going to make you have the most hope, whatever is going to make you feel the most impassioned, if it took until you were 80 years old for your greatest dream to come true, would it be worth it? Right? So stop being let down by your season of waiting. So often we get hopeless because we're in this season of waiting, or we're in this season of feeling like we're not reaching what it is that we're wanting to reach, when at the end of the day, like a lot of times it's that season that's leaving us feeling hopeless. We're worried that we're not going to get it. We're worried that we're not going to get there. And we're stuck on the timing of it. Like we're not getting it fast enough. And we really have to put like a kibosh. That's a word, right? A kibosh, a finish, an end. I don't know. I've heard people say that.
Kebab is what I'm thinking about right now.
No. Okay, now I don't know if it's a word. Put a kibosh on it. It is a word. I know it is. It's probably a word. Put a stop to it.
Google
I think
that.
it's like Yiddish or something. Okay, I grew up around a lot of Jewish people. They spoke a lot of Yiddish. Okay.
Okay.
Kibosh. Look it up. You live in Florida. You should know these terms. Probably. She's gonna Google it. While she's doing that, I'm going to use this example.
Spoil or destroy an idea or a plan. There you go. You did it.
Yes, it is a word. The kibosh. We want to spoil and destroy that thought process. Okay. So like a good example. All right. Kind of a silly example, but like last year I have this garden. I love my garden. Last year I planted strawberries. Very excited about these strawberries. Nothing happened with the strawberries. Started to feel really hopeless. I know this seems silly compared to the level of hopelessness that we're actually talking about. However, really was like, oh man, like nothing's going to happen with these. Like I worked so hard. I took such good care of them. I guess it's just like, I just have to throw away this dream of these really pretty strawberries. Like this is just the worst. Like it was not a good time. This year, I don't know what happened to those strawberries, but they are growing in full, like they are gigantic. The flowers have all bloomed, and it's a whole year later. Like these things survived the winter. These things have come back in full bloom. It took over a year. They were supposed to bloom in a couple of months, right? Like the kind of holding season of these strawberries is if I planted them early in the spring, by summer, I should have had strawberries. It took over a year for them to actually grow. And so my hopelessness and disappointment in this plant not growing was just because I had an expectation of timing. It didn't happen on my timing. It happened exactly as it was supposed to and exactly as it needed to. Apparently, they needed more time. And that wasn't for me to decide. I still got to the end result, but I spent all this time in, disappointment because I was stuck on the timing of it. And the only other example I have is like when I look at my kids, I think, my goal for my children, like my one purpose for my children is that they grow up knowing the love of Jesus. That is me. That is my parenting. I want them to have the hope of knowing that Jesus loves them, that they are loved, and that they are happy. And if someone came to me and said, I can guarantee that this will happen for your children, but it won't maybe happen until they're like 60, but then they will die knowing love, knowing Jesus, knowing the truth, knowing just true happiness, I would be okay with that. Like I would absolutely be okay with that, even if it took that long of the timing. We have to trust that, like, even if it's not on our timing, it's still okay. We still have hope. So we need to ask ourselves, how valid is my internal story that I tell myself about what's going on in my life? How can I fight against these things that I tell myself that make me feel hopeless in a tough season? How do you talk to yourself about what you're going through? We have the divine power to demolish strongholds, y'all. We have the ability to demolish the thoughts in our head that make us feel hopeless. So our last final tips for helping your internal hopeless habits. I can't say words today. Our hopeless habits. Number 1, write it down while you speak about it. Okay. As you speak about this hopeless habit, write it down, get it out of your brain.
Number 2, identify the feeling you don't want. So when those negative thoughts are coming in, replace it with a more positive one, what you actually do want to happen, right?
And number 3, write it from a third person perspective. This might seem really silly, but sometimes when we're immersed in something, it is really hard to see it from the outside. So writing about it from an outside perspective, instead of saying, I am going through this, I am terrible at this, I can't do this, write about it from a third person and see what it feels like to talk about yourself that way. If I were to say, Cesley can't do that, Cesley is awful at that, it would feel so different. And then our last tip for keeping hope high during a hard season or after a hard season is stop using universal quantifiers. So stop saying things like, I always go through this, I never get what I want. It's going to kill your hope. Stop doing it.
All right, Grow Girls, we want to leave you with this thought. No matter how dark the night may seem, there is always the promise of a new dawn. Through the power of hope, resilience, and community, we can navigate even the toughest of seasons with strength and grace. Remember, hope is not just a fleeting emotion. It's a choice we make every day to believe in the possibility of a better tomorrow.
And remember, you are worthy, you are capable, you're beautiful, and we can't wait to watch you grow, girl.